Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Authors. I'm Susan Tarnowski, host for the show, and today we will be interviewing our interviewer, Barbara La Valleur. Barbara has written a memoir, and it caps a career already as a photojournalism, a blogger, a TV host, and many other things. I think you're going to be very interested to hear some of the stories that Barbara has experienced and has shared in this memoir from her life. So we will today go right to Barbara. Hi, Barbara. How are you today?
I'm fine, and I have to say, it's just a little weird being on the other side.
I bet. Barbara has done several interviews for Speaking of Authors, and this is the first time that she is the recipient of interview questions.
Indeed.
At least on this show.
Indeed.
So let's begin. In preparation for today, I read an article that talked about 4 characteristics of a memoir. And I'd like to share those with you.
Please.
The first thing is memoirs are true stories. Memoirs have a focus rather than a series of unrelated anecdote or a litany of life events. Memoirs have transformation. Something needs to change, otherwise, why would people read it and why would you write it? And a memoir is an inner story that ties to something universal. I'm going to come back to those questions in a little bit, but first, the title of your book is Front Row Gal. What does that mean to you to be a front row gal?
I'm a person who likes to sit in the front row when I go to events, and as a photojournalist, I didn't necessarily sit in the front row. I might have been standing off to the side so that I could capture the photograph of, or photographs of, whoever was doing the talk or whatever event I was photographing, but also audience reactions. So I would call that also being in the front row. One of the reasons that or things that I've learned about myself is that I'm easily distracted. I'm looking at, what people are wearing, their beautiful scarves, their nice hairdos, and hats, and I'm a hat girl too. I normally wear a hat, but anyway, if I sit in the front row, I am focused on what is happening in front of me, and not on all those other things that distract me from being present to what's actually happening. So for me, it's very important to be in the front row, and my husband and I are notorious for sitting right in the front row in front of the pulpit at Westminster.
Do you recall doing that as a youngster as well, or is this something you've learned as a technique to be more of who you wanted to be?
I would say the latter. I don't recall wanting to sit in the front seat in the desks at school. I loved going to school, despite having some really interesting things that happened in grade school and middle school and high school and college. And I think that it was something that I learned when I was studying to become a journalist.
That's wonderful. Mm-hmm. Barbara does have a number of stories, and if we had all day, we could probably tell all of them, but I will ask you to tell some as we go along.
Sure.
How and when did you think about crafting a memoir? And then what actually got you started writing it?
A couple of good questions. So I have been thinking about writing a memoir since I was probably 19, which sounds weird. What do I know about what my life was going to be? But I really thought about it the last 20 years the 20 years I lived in Europe. And I thought it was interesting. In the book, I have a chapter that's broken into 4 5-year periods of the times that I was living in Europe, got married, had 2 children, and eventually left when that marriage ended. However, interestingly enough, I've just lost my train of thought.
Okay.
Okay, how's that?
That's
what was I
fine.
thinking?
You were going to tell me a little bit about what actually caused you to start the process of writing.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. It was about the letters. So I based those 4 or 5 year periods on letters that I wrote to my mother. They're all quotes. There's a paragraph or more of quotes from the letters that I wrote, because it was before computers, before email and all of that, and phone calls were way too expensive. So I wrote in one of the first letters to my mother, "Please keep all my letters. I may want them someday." And I thought, I didn't remember writing that. But she passed away a few years ago, and we own a property called La Farm up in Otter Tail County. I was born in Fergus Falls, raised in Ashby and Bad Lake, two small communities not far from each other. And the farm that I currently own with my daughter, Claire, it belonged to my grandparents. They had it for 40 years. Then they sold it to the Martins, who had it for 40 years. And now we've had it in our family, either with my sisters or my daughter, for going on 27 years now. So, yeah, there's just something to be said about that. And then what the second part of your question was, how did it actually come to fruition? I think I knew that I would need some kind of accountability to actually get it done. So I hired what's called a productivity coach. This is someone actually I've known for many years, and she used to live in Minnesota, now lives in Florida. So we worked together on Zoom for 4 years, and I would tell her what I was doing on that 1 hour a week, and then I would come back at the end of that hour and say, this is what I did. And then at the end of that, I'd probably say what I'm going to do for the rest of the week, and then the next week, and so forth. And I don't think I would have gotten it done without that. I mean, she was great, and I mean, she didn't really tell me what to do, but it was that accountability that's so important. So
Well, I'm struck by the fact that at 19 you thought you might write a memoir. And I was struck also when I read the book about the comment to your mom to please keep your letters. And you weren't sure quite where you were going yet,
not at all.
but you'd already had some interesting things happen in your life.
I had.
All right. Well, thank you. We know each other, and you mentioned to me before I read your memoir that you write the way you talk, and I agree. Can you describe that a little bit?
Well, probably the best way to describe it is when I lucked out and got a job as a freelance photojournalist for 7 German newspapers. Happened totally by accident. And my German was not, I was fluent, I still am fluent in German, but my grammar is terrible. I would take evening classes, and those classes would be filled with, about 20 different people from maybe 15 different countries, all speaking bad German like I was. So it was really hard to learn, correct German. I had German friends, of course, and initially, for example, when my daughters started kindergarten, Andrea, who's 13 months older than Claire, they started at 3 years old. She didn't speak German when she went. But 6 months, pretty much to the day she started, wham, one day she could speak German. And she had become aggressive, as a 3-year-old, because they couldn't understand her and she couldn't understand them. And so if she wanted the toy, she'd bonk them on the head and take the toy. And I don't know what happened, but she got the communication of the German language. And then when Claire started a year later, she could already speak German, because when they were playing in their room, I could hear them speaking German. Didn't know what they were saying, but I could hear that they were speaking German. And it's really funny because I did learn from my daughters better in language, because they would correct my German, sometimes laughing at it. It was humbling, but, 4 and 5-year-olds.
That's a hard language to walk into.
Correcting your speaking, but
So how does that
yeah.
translate into how you've written your memoir, the language you use?
Well, back to my editor at the German newspaper, I wrote in German because I did do features as well. I wrote in German like I spoke German. So he really understood what I was trying to say. So it was very easy for him to correct my grammar, my language. So to me, when you can write the way you speak, it's more conversational. I find it more interesting. I'm definitely not a dry person. I'm a lively, active, and animated person. So
Often we find that when people listen to our interviews, they're interested in how people came to be writers. And so that's where these questions are kind of coming from. It's okay to be yourself as a writer. In fact, you're saying that's really the only way that you connect with readers.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that, but it's the way that's worked best for me. I mean, people have different methods, and wouldn't criticize how somebody else writes because it's right for them, you know.
Wonderful.
So we're all different.
All right. So you mentioned your letters to your mother over a 20-year period, and you've mentioned in the interview now that you lived in Europe for 20 years, which was a high school dream.
Yeah.
So why did you think the letters communicated that period of your life to your readers so well? What was it about that seemed like the way to share your ideas and thoughts?
Reading the letters, which I did between 2 and 3 years ago now, I went up to the farm and I just read the letters in a couple of different, maybe 3 or 4 different periods of time. And I had forgotten a lot of things. So I thought it was more authentic, even though a lot of it's kind of not very happy. I mean, we struggled financially so bad. It was just really, sometimes we would go for months without a paycheck. And we had started our own business. We'd built a house at the same time, and it was crazy.
And had
Totally
2 small
crazy.
children.
And had 2 small children.
Right.
And my then husband was in Italy for a week, Germany for a week, France for a week, Germany for a week. You know, it really was an incredible time. And I didn't have a car when I first went. You know, we didn't have a television for a couple of years. It was...
And world events ended up impacting a lot of what happened.
Oh yes,
in
absolutely.
those areas.
The wall,
You talk about
wall falling.
the wall coming down.
Yeah,
absolutely.
it was a great thing for Europe, probably for the world, and yet at the time, you know, we owned our own business. We had, I think, a dozen Germans that we hired. It was a manufacturing company of scientific instruments, and there was no planning by the leaders of Germany, and it happened so suddenly. It's hard to believe. And yet, had there been some planning socially, for example, many of the people from the former East Germany wanted to have more freedom and come to what was formerly called West Germany. And yet, the money people wanted to go to East Germany, the former East Germany, because that's where they could make more money. And so it was this...
Your business got caught in the crossfire there.
It did, because while we had many orders, people were not paying for the orders that they were receiving or had already received because they were investing their money in the former East Germany. I mean, it was a very, very difficult time. And I think because of the letters, and some of them are very raw, I may not have chosen to write that way. So I just thought, I'm going to take the what's so and just lay it out.
Yep. And Barbara, I will say, I personally found those to carry the emotional content as well as move your story along. I think readers of your memoir will see that as well. So I appreciated it, and it was a technique I might not have thought of were I in your shoes. So thank you for that.
Well, and I didn't think of it until I read the letters, and I thought, how can I capture these? And it's funny because there are 13 chapters in the final book. 13's my lucky number. But I had, I think, 16 chapters when all was said and done. And then I came upon, I can put those 4 or 5 year periods as one chapter and break them up into 5 year. So I could get to my, I mean, it's a little thing, but.
No, I think the readers will be very interested in that. You know, you have described yourself in the book many times, and in our conversations, as a serial risk taker. I think, in fact, that's on the back cover of your book. Talk to me a little bit about that, and talk to me about how that impacted your life.
I'm not sure, but I would imagine it started when I was growing up on a farm outside of Ashby, Minnesota, which is, I consider my hometown, as well as Battle Lake, where I graduated from high school. But we did daring things when I was young. I had a Shetland pony and rode bareback and stood up on my horse, which comes to light later in an event in the fiasco and the circus story, chapter rather. And then when the day after I graduated from high school, I went with my grandparents who lived in south of San Diego, drove back to California. I was determined to, take flight, and I wanted to go to San Diego State College, and that led me to visiting the college when President Kennedy spoke there in 1963. I had a Kodak Instamatic camera, and these are the two photographs that you can see. John F. Kennedy is like that big as he stands at the podium, because I was up, not in the front row, I was way up in the back bleachers, with thousands of people, and I walked down, and I was determined to get a close-up with my Instamatic, and that was as close-up as I got. And I actually went under the ropes, and this Secret Service man came dashing over to me saying, "Hey lady, you're in the press box." I said, "Just a minute, I have to take my pictures." And I took my pictures, and then I left.
So even security services didn't intimidate you at that time.
And I talk of another hilarious episode that maybe I can share later, but with President Bill Clinton when he came to town.
Let's go here. You've mentioned the two things that I had planned to talk about. So you had hard times, but some of your stories are laugh out loud, and I couldn't decide between the Bill and Hillary Clinton story or the circus story, and you've mentioned both of those. So let's start with the circus story.
Okay. Oh, wow. Well, I'll preface it by saying I am, one claim to fame, the class clown, co-class clown of Battle Lake High School, 1963.
Did you get a sash that said that?
No, I didn't, but I got my picture in the annual with my friend Bruce Noyes, who has since passed away. He's a great guy, lots of fun. Anyway, so I always looked for interesting things to do with my children that didn't cost a fortune in Germany. And so there was a big circus that came to town. And so we were, once again, back bleachers at this big tent circus. And Andrea and Claire were about, I can't remember, 9 or 10 or something like that, maybe 7 or 8. Anyway. So
at a time when it was embarrassing to be with you anyway.
Oh yeah, I mean everything I did was embarrassing to them. Sometimes it still is, but who cares? I mean, they have to deal with that. That's not my problem. So the announcer who was going to do a trick with a horse said, "Is there anybody who wants to come and stand on top of a horse?" And I thought, "Oh, I've done that before. I can do that." So I'm waving madly in the back row, and he calls on me. So I go down, and he hooks up a big harness, to hold me. And then, I mean, this horse was enormous. I had no idea. I was looking down and it didn't look that big. It was enormous.
Not your pony.
Yeah, no, it was like at least twice as big as my pony, or if not 3 times. It was huge. And anyway, so they pull this harness thing up. So I'm actually standing on top of the horse. I'm doing okay initially because he's just walking, and I am being held up rather firmly on the horse. But then he begins to trot the horse. And I didn't do so well. And I started swinging like this. And clearly I was not standing on the horse any longer. So they let me down. And it was so funny because I literally fell on top of this man, the circus man. And
sort of the ringmaster of this whole thing.
Yeah, totally, the ringmaster. And I just looked at him, I grabbed his cheeks, and I gave him a kiss on the cheek because what else was there to do? I was like literally in his face. And
kind of got a standing ovation almost for it.
Well, the crowd loved it, and my daughters were dying of embarrassment. And, I got unhooked and I went back up and sat with Andy and Claire, who were, kind of
That's just such a great story.
And then the woman sitting in front of us turned around and said, "Are you a plant?" Like in German. Are you part of the circus? And I said, "Good heavens, no."
Although that might be a new career.
Yeah. No. I think I've passed that time. Yeah.
Well, let's skip forward. Your book really does, in a variety of ways, talk about your political affiliations, and one of the ways you and your husband both give back to the world is through support of political causes and personas that you hope make the world a better place. But the brush with Hillary and Bill Clinton was a little less orchestrated than some of the things you've done. So could you tell us a little bit about that? And you're about 50 by then?
Yes, it was actually right after I came back from Europe. I was really suffering from, the end of my 20-year marriage. I was very sad, and I wanted to do something, but I wasn't ready to start a job. So I thought, I'm going to volunteer for a while and just, get used to being away from America for 20 years. Because I had culture shock coming back here, total culture shock. And so I went, there was a woman named Ann Winia who was running for a U.S. Senate seat.
And had been president of North Hennepin Community College.
Right. And I thought, well, I'll go and volunteer at her campaign. So I went there, and the first day, the woman who interviewed me, Grace, was her name, said, what's your background? And I said, well, I'm a photojournalist. I mean, her face lit up like a neon sign, and she immediately put me in charge of the White House press office at the Hilton Hotel when the president came to town 2 times before the election. So that was I came in July, I think that was in August, and he came in September and in November, I believe. But so I did that. I went there. There were all these really famous people, but I didn't know who they were. They were cabinet members. I had no idea because I hadn't been, living here for 20 years. So anyway, these 2 young women who came from the White House, who were organizing everything, they said to go down to this downstairs to the basement where the garage was. I wasn't sure why they sent me there, but anyway, I went there, and the 3 of us were talking, and then all of a sudden those 2 were called away, and I was just standing there, and pretty soon a Secret Service man comes dashing up to me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I answered honestly. I said, I don't know, I'm not sure. And I mean, he looked like he was in panic. He grabs me by the arm, kind of gently, but firmly, and walks me to this little room, locks me in this room where there's a table and a chair, and literally it was like the size of a bathroom. It was just tiny. And I said, well, can I peek out the Venetian blinds? Because I knew the president and Hillary Clinton were going to walk right by that window. And so he said, okay, but not very much, you know. So here I am, a 50-year-old woman, getting on my hands and knees on this little table, and I'm peering out the window as they walk by. So I'm like this far away.
So a true brush with fate on that
Lordy.
one.
I mean, it was hilarious when I think back on it. And then the Secret Service man, after they took off, of course, came and unlocked and apologized profusely. And then I went back upstairs in the presidential suite with these two women and proceeded to watch the news report of his speaking.
Of what had happened.
And yeah.
That's wonderful.
And the real juicy thing was that they gave me a bottle of wine from the presidential package that was there that they hadn't opened. So,
Barbara, I have so many more questions, and I want to just keep us within a time frame. Sure. So let me just highlight a few things that our readers can follow up on. Mm-hmm. Some of the hard times you shared really were shared in your chapter on death lessons. Mm-hmm. And I would, rather than speaking about it today, I really would like our readers to consider carefully looking at that particular chapter. But I will say that we said earlier, the characteristics of memoirs have transformation. And at the end of your chapters, you have defining moments and lessons learned. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you a hard question. If you could give one or two lessons learned for your life thus far, what might those be?
Again, I would go back to take a risk, because I would rather have failed at something than not to have tried. I think that a lot of people don't have the support. I had a wonderful support from my parents, especially my mother. You mentioned death. My father died by suicide when I was 12, a huge factor. But death has made me a stronger person because I've had so much of it throughout my life. And it's going to happen to all of us. So it's something that we can either run away from or embrace, and it's going to happen. So
I think that's a great takeaway.
Yeah,
take a risk.
Yeah. And I also, I mean, one of the things in having the lessons learned and what was the other one? Lessons learned and
defining
moments yeah. is that I want people to take risks. I want them to know that they all have a story to tell. Every person could write their memoir, really. And that's what I want people to be left with, that I have a story too.
And you know, that would have been my last question. So let me do one.
Are we out of time already?
One piece, we are. In your landmark chapter, mm-hmm. you end with, or you include a quotation under Lessons Learned by Werner Erhard. Mm-hmm. And Landmark is an association that you have had for many years.
It's an international transformational educational company.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what the quote was. It is important that you get clear for yourself that your only access to impacting life is action. The world does not care what you intend, how committed you are, how you feel, or what you think, and it certainly has no interest in what you want and don't want. Take a look at life as it is lived and see for yourself that the world only moves for you when you act. Is memoir part of your acting? Is that part of your action on the world?
Part of action. I wouldn't say acting, but action. Absolutely. I knew I had a story to tell. I didn't know what it was going to be literally until I started writing it. I've had a lot of interesting experiences. I jumped out of an airplane on my 66th birthday. That was the most thrilling thing I've ever done. Highly recommend it, actually. It was so.
You've made me
fun.
Consider that.
Oh my gosh, it's so great! I loved it.
Well, we're gonna wrap. one of the transformation things was an inner life that tied to something universal. And I was very struck by your chapter on Mallard Island, and I would recommend that to readers. It's a place where you thought, you created, you interacted with people who were doing the same kinds of things.
Yeah. Actually, that picture on the right was taken at Mallard Island. Picture on the left is from Barcelona, where my daughter lived for 5 years. She's now back in the States. And the other one is the title of my book, which was taken at La Farm.
All
So,
right. That is wonderful. And we should showcase that again, too, that beautiful property that is owned by
and
your
I'm proud
family.
that my daughter actually designed that.
That's wonderful.
The cover of
That's
my book.
wonderful.
Yep.
Barbara, there's so much more in this book. I just so highly recommend it to readers. I recommend it to other folks who would like to think about their lives in ways they perhaps have not thought about it. And thank you. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for being brave to write that.
Thank you.
Barbara La Valleur's book, Front Row Gal, is available through Amazon, but it is newly available as an ebook. And we have mentioned that Barbara was a photojournalist, still takes photos, she still posts photos regularly, especially of La Farm. And the ebook has over 50 pictures,
That's
I
correct.
believe,
Yeah.
from various places. So either one of those can be obtained through Amazon, and I highly recommend this as a read. Barbara, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
This was so fun. It could have been longer in my estimation, but never
Yes,
mind.
it really could have. There are lots of stories yet to tell, and
Absolutely.
perhaps reading the book will help with that.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us. We've enjoyed this interview immensely today. We'll see you next time on Speaking of Authors.